got to interview some fascinating athletes that were preparing for the London Olympic Games back in 2012 and hear all about their mental preparation. And that was sort of one introduction of just how encompassing that mental side was and how all factors for sport performance were really related and tied in and you couldn't really tease them apart. And over the years, my passion for nutrition and that as another impactful factor for both performance and just health in general led me to go back to school to become a registered dietitian. And now I feel very fortunate to be able to sort of combine these two areas. And I do find they're quite closely linked together. And yeah, so I'll talk about that a little bit tonight as well. And I yeah, hope that you enjoy the content tonight. So again, I'd love to just get a sense of, if there's anything in particular you're hoping to learn about, feel free to just sort of jot it in the chat, and then I'll just make sure that, I touch on it throughout. And if it doesn't come up throughout, then I'll certainly make sure to answer it at the end. So yeah, if there's anything in particular, feel free to just pop it in the chat now. And I'll give you just a few seconds there. I see there's a few already about one's about, yeah, guidance around iron and calcium. And certainly we'll be talking about that later on because two very important minerals there. And we've got, yeah, karate and distance hiking. Awesome. Yeah, so feel free to pop some things in there and then I'll just sort of carry on, but we will monitor the chat as we go. Okay, so I was so excited when Kevin actually suggested, why don't you talk a little bit about how that mental side and nutrition are related? And I was thinking, absolutely. I sort of, I think about it a lot, but it's something I always talk about in my nutrition presentations. So back when I was doing a lot of that mental performance, this word Kaizen had always really resonated with me. And even when I was an athlete, I remember the first time I read it and just it really, yeah, just really connected with it. And so it's a Japanese term meaning continuous improvement and kind of regardless of outcome. So just always trying to improve, just to be your own best self. And thinking about how can we do those little daily 1% improvements to reach our own potential. So not compared to anybody else, but just our own potential and regardless of the outcome, just reaching that. And so that's sort of my approach, both with the mental side and then also with nutrition. And I like to sort of think of this quote, how you do anything is how you do everything. And even more so, how you do the little things ends up impacting those big things. And that nutrition piece is another piece of the puzzle for sport performance that can really make a difference and can really be one of those little things that we keep tweaking over time and improving on, and it impacts all those other areas. And so just wanted to share story about, you'll see this runner here, Usain Bolt, who, as we know, a phenomenal athlete, has set multiple world records and records for gold medals in the 100-meter and the 200-meter and the relay. And back when he was kind of, first emerging, and obviously he's always been a phenomenal athlete. And even when he was winning world championships, he did kind of have a reputation as not always taking, some of those things for sport performance too seriously, such as nutrition. And again, even though I think he had won a world championship already at this time, he was clearly a very elite level athlete. And he realized, I'm not reaching my potential though. So even though I'm doing, amazing things in my sport, he hadn't reached his potential. And so he actually went through quite a big nutrition change and really started to focus on that and incorporate that. And that's also around the same time that he got a new coach. And that was just one area that he kind of like, okay, I need to pay a little more attention to in order to reach my own potential. And, sure enough, kept improving and did pretty phenomenal things in his career. So if you think about connecting the two, mental side and nutrition side, and this is an approach that I used to take in sports psych, and it's actually very similar when I think about working with people with nutrition. So first identifying, and can even kind of think about this with your own sport or activity or what it might be. How do you want to feel when you're performing that sport? What is that ideal performance state? How are your energy levels? How are the nerves? How are you at, that final minute of the game or the final sprint of a race? How are you feeling in those moments? And what does that ideal performance look like? And then kind of thinking, okay, so where am I at? Is my energy sustained throughout? Or Are there, times where I maybe falter or my energy dips a little? And just sort of thinking, okay, so are there gaps there? And then what are some strategies for closing those gaps? And then that's where it can really, tailor that nutrition. Okay, so when we think about timing, maybe we need to up the protein a little bit here, or maybe we need some more fiber carbs to last us for those sports. So as we go through the presentation tonight, kind of give some thought to, okay, what do I want that ideal performance state to kind of feel like? And how is that energy and what does that look like? And then as we talk about some of these strategies throughout the presentation, can think how to incorporate those. Okay, so definitely wanted to touch on this. So, throughout your athletic careers and even life in general, there's going to be a lot of different information about, oh, well, so and so did this, and so was on this diet, and Serena Williams went vegan and LeBron James cut out carbs. There's always going to be, different headlines. And I think it's really important to remember that, all these top athletes who did these different nutrition changes, they were focused on what's working best for them and their sport and their body. And I think it's really important to just remember that, we're all individual athletes. And so what works for somebody may not necessarily work for another, but what's the meal pattern for us that's going to help our performance and also still be helpful for us in general? We want to make sure we're supporting that health and well-being. And, all four examples here did very different things. So again, it does show, we've got the golfer up top who really wanted to kind of improve his distance, improve his strength, and was doing something like 6 protein shakes a day. And then we had, another one who decided to cut out meat and then changing carbs. So just to say that you'll hear a lot of different approaches, but I think it's important to always come back to, okay, what's best for me, my sport, and also just what does kind of the research say and support for athlete performance. All right, so a little overview of what we'll talk about today. So I will review the macronutrients again. Again, as in last week, we went over them, but I'm going to touch on them a little bit of a different way and what they're doing when we eat some of these foods and what they do in our body, and how this will then impact performance. Again, we'll talk a little bit about fueling, both before, during, and after, and go into a little more detail with that. We'll also talk about some components just to optimize that recovery, because that's so important when we're training at a high level. And then we'll definitely touch on the important role of micronutrients. So again, that iron, calcium, we'll certainly be talking about those and just how important they are. And then I'll talk a little bit about inflammation as well and how we can support that for athletes, and then some strategies for improving your own sport nutrition. So first and foremost, food is our fuel. So, treat yourself like the elite race car that you want to be. So carbohydrates providing those 4 kilocalories of energy, protein providing 1 grams, providing 4 kilocalories of energy, and then fat being a little more calorically dense, providing that 9. But ultimately, these calories are what's fueling our performance and therefore are so important. Okay, so we're doing a quick little poll. I'm going to see now, Kevin, oh, look at that. Okay, fantastic. So the first one is just, which food is a good source of carbohydrates? So thinking here, with reasonable portion sizes compared across the 4, which one here might have the most carbohydrates in it? Or be the best source of carbohydrates? So feel free to take a guess at your answer. Should be anonymous, don't worry. Oh, I guess maybe I need to.
Then I can end it when you want me to. It says it's got 30 seconds left, but we can end it before.
Sure. Yeah, some people have been able to have a chance to answer. How many responses do we have so far?
Oh, so you're not seeing the poll there?
No, I'm not.
Oh, no.
But you should be able to, when you end it, and then share it.
Yes.
Perfect.
There we go.
Okay, awesome. So absolutely, sweet potatoes, fantastic source of carbohydrates there. So those who were here last week, certainly paying attention. Okay, let's try poll number 2. So which food here would be a good source of protein?
Oops.
I think that's still the carb one, but I think there should be a drop down at the top for the protein one. Testing your Zoom skills.
Wow. Oh yeah, you're right. Here we go.
Yeah, it's kind of strange.
Yama. Spelling
Yama.
as well. Wow. How embarrassing. That's why I'm a soccer coach. That's yams, people. That is yams.
Yeah, so best source of protein there, yams, salmon, peanut butter, or apples. Okay, so a bit mixed. So and that's fair. Peanut butter does have some protein in it, absolutely. Salmon likely would provide more in a normal serving, since peanut butter probably having 1 to 2 tablespoons, and in that a regular portion of salmon, there's going to be a bit more protein there. But peanut butter certainly is a source as well. And let's go with fats to finish. So good source of fat, again, kind of regular portion size for each. So which one would sort of be the best source of fats here? A chicken breast, avocado, baked potato, or spinach? And no, the baked potato isn't topped with anything, just baking that in the oven. All right, perfect. Yeah, so avocado would certainly be a really good source. And again, chicken breast definitely has some fat in it, though some chicken breast is quite lean, and they'll still be a little bit, but avocado is a really, really good source of providing fats there. Okay, awesome. Servant's pretty good with various types of the macronutrients. And so again, I'm just going to quickly review this because I did talk about this last week, but just again, recognizing carbohydrates really important for providing that rich source of energy for our muscles and for our brains. And then that they do break down to glucose and then get stored as glycogen in our liver and muscles. And that's where we're going to go into a little more detail here. So kind of thinking about different carbohydrates. So we've got our simple carbohydrates. So thinking plain white potato, piece of white bread, things that don't have a lot of fiber in them, maybe some juice, and then things like candy. Those are going to be our really simple carbohydrates, and they break down into monosaccharides, with mono being one, so like a one sugar, or the disaccharides, which would be like two sugars. And so obviously a one sugar or a kind of two sugar chain are going to be a lot more easily absorbed and absorb quite quickly compared to these complex carbohydrates, which break down to the poly, meaning many, so many sort of chains of the sugar, and making those starches, that fiber, and that glycogen. So what does this mean in terms of when we eat these foods? So the dark gray line here, so we've got time across the bottom, and on the left-hand side are the blood glucose levels. So like the blood sugar levels. And so when we have those simple carbohydrates that break down really quickly, they're going to raise our blood sugars really quickly because we ingest them, they break down right away, and then there's going to be that rise in our blood sugars, and then there's going to be a pretty quick fall. It's not really a sustained peak or sustained energy. And those complex carbohydrates, given that they're more challenging, they take more work for our body to break down. They break down a little more slowly. It's going to be a more gradual rise. So still going to increase our blood sugar response, and then more gradual fall. So that's kind of that role that fiber plays, is that it's going to sustain that curve a little bit more and make it a bit more long lasting energy. And of course, when we do see these rise in the blood sugars, then we'll have a rise in insulin to follow to help with that absorption and uptake of the blood sugars into our muscles. So why does this matter? So I just want you to start to think about, okay, so what does that mean in terms of type of energy? Do we need quick acting right now for my sport, or do I need sustained? Like I mentioned, when that blood sugars increase, that'll also increase that insulin release. So just thinking about when might you want simple carbohydrates, so quick boost of energy, topping up those glycogen stores, or afterwards when we're trying to get kind of quick carbohydrates to our muscles for repair. And so we'll talk about this again as we kind of weave throughout and talk about the recovery and also eating around our performance. And then just getting into, again, protein, recognizing that it's got so many important roles: immune system, enzymes, hormones, made up of those amino acids. So again, thinking about, and we talked about protein or sizes, portion sizes last week. So thinking of kind of like a palm of those animal-based proteins, and then plant-based are usually, it varies a little bit just depending on their composition. And these are just examples here. So some plant-based options on the right and some animal-based options on the left, but both are fantastic sources of protein. So protein and blood sugars. So on the green line at the top, so again, we've got time on the bottom and then blood sugars on the left here. So this green dotted line is the carbohydrates. So again, and this particular one's probably showing faster acting ones. Those aren't high fiber carbs. But again, you've got that rise and fall. And then protein is a much lower rise in our blood sugars, and it's a lot slower. So you can see it's peaking around almost 3 hours after eating. So when we eat protein with some carbohydrates, it helps flatten that high green spike, as you can see in the carbohydrates, and it'll help sort of even that out a little bit when we pair it with some protein. And then we'll get into fats. So again, so important for absorption of fat soluble vitamins, important fuel source for low intensity activities, and just has so many important roles in the body. And for servings, last week kind of talked about, thinking of like a thumb, about 10 grams. So again, a couple tablespoons of peanut butter, quarter cup of seeds. Those are just some examples of kind of a serving size. So in terms of fat in our blood sugars, you can see the red line at the bottom. So fat actually has a very almost negligible rise in our impact in our blood sugars. And again, it's quite slow and sustained, little bit of rise, and really kind of takes a long time. So again, when we're pairing those carbohydrates with protein and fat, it's going to really kind of just decrease that, and it won't get a quick rise and a quick fall. Okay, so thinking about contribution of fuel sources. I just wanted to touch on this here because now as we're thinking about kind of blood sugars, but thinking about, so depending on the intensity of our sport and what we're doing, it's going to impact where we're pulling our fuel from. So at the top here, it's saying like a 25% VO2 max. And basically what's that referring to is that we're using 25% of our maximum oxygen capacity. So this would be a low intensity exercise. Maybe we're out walking or brisk walking up some hills. And so this light gray is basically, you can think of it as fat. So we're primarily using fat as our fuel source. And this little sliver of dark gray here is glycogen. And so barely using glycogen in this low intensity exercise here. As the intensity increases, you can see that the ratio really changes. So our energy from fats was really decreasing, and now we're really starting to pull from those glycogen stores, or the carbohydrate fuel source. And then as we get to an 85%, so really, really high intensity, we're really relying on, again, on the glycogen, those carbohydrates, also quite a bit on just sort of plasma glucose, which is, again, those kind of accessible blood sugars that we can pull from. But it's a primarily carbohydrate source when we're getting up to that really high intensity exercise. So just sort of keeping that in mind. And this graph is just saying, it's showing the same thing, just a different way, that as the exercise intensity increases, we're using that carbohydrate energy storage, and then the fat, the percentage from fats is really decreasing as that intensity increases. And if anyone has any questions as we go along here, please, again, feel free to put them in the chat. So kind of putting this together, and some of this goes a little bit further than we probably need to tonight, but just as exercise starts, your muscles start to contract and they need that ATP from that glucose. So muscles have enough ATP in them to last for about 3 seconds. So think of like a quick start in a sprint. First 3 seconds, they can support that. And then creatine phosphate kind of kicks in for the next 8 seconds. But then we really rely on using that aerobic respiration. And that's that glucose and oxygen. And that's where we sort of, it's bit more kind of sustained. It can certainly get to high intensity, but really need carbohydrates to help with that kind of fueling. And then also just during exercise, our insulin sensitivity is increased because our muscle cells want to be able to better take up that glucose. So that's increased to help with that. And we want to avoid getting into low blood sugars. So as our exercise is increasing, our blood sugars are dipping down, which is why our body's then trying to use those glycogen stores to break down some of those sugars so that it can use to fuel that exercise. So we want to make sure that those blood sugars don't get too low when in our sports, because then that's when you start to feel that dizziness or that fatigue and impaired thinking. All right, so I just want to touch a little bit on fueling, and this is a little more specific than we went into last week. So this is based on per like kilogram of weight per day. So if you know your weight in pounds, you would divide that by 2.2. And again, these are kind of, they're rough estimates. And again, keeping in mind it's for probably like not a super young population, kind of again, more high performance athletes that are a bit older. So 30 to 35 kcals for a moderately active average person who's not doing a lot of intense sports. So again, if you took your weight in pounds divided by 2.2, got a dog barking in the background, hopefully no one can hear that. And then that would be the amount per day. But recognizing that athletes can approach up to 40 to 70 calories per kilogram per day. And depending on the person and the training and the sport, it can be really high levels. So just recognizing that some athletes have really high energy needs. And it can be challenging at times to kind of balance that with also how that the gastrointestinal, the stomach's feeling, making sure that you're feeling okay despite trying to get in the food to support that exercise. So female athletes, can be at risk for insufficient intake, just depending on some of the demands of their sport and some of that culture around it. So important to make sure that they're getting enough fuel. And and important to have nutrient dense foods, of course, when you are trying to support those high energy levels, making sure that the foods are really nutrient dense. So last week we sort of talked about this, but more in thinking of like the fist size of the carbohydrate. So I just wanted to provide a reference again using that grams per kilogram per day. So if we're thinking kind of like, and actually before I just discuss this, I will again mention that again, so important for an athlete to listen to their body. And, even though there might be a recommendation to eat a bit less on a rest day, sometimes they'll just feel that they need more than that. And I think it's most important to always listen to that. But just, again, generally, so you take your weight in pounds, divide by 2.2, and rest day might be around 2 to 3 grams per kilogram per day for carbohydrates. And then as the intensity goes up, it can get, quite high. So very high intensity, 8 to 12 grams per kilogram per day. So can really be high needs when we're doing a lot of training. Protein in terms of sort of quantifying that. So again, recommendation is around 1.4 to 2 grams per kilogram per day. But timing is so important. It's a general recommendation, but having even amounts throughout the day really has the most support for muscle synthesis and for helping with kind of that lean muscle mass, recovery, all of those things. So we absolutely want it around our training and our games as well, but trying to keep protein still consistent at our other meals too. And so kind of aiming for like a 20 to 25 grams spread throughout the day, sort of where the best research is supporting for helping with that muscle protein synthesis. As I mentioned, having it around that training and competition. And, some people, I get asked a lot just about, okay, well, I'm trying to have more protein and yes, there may upwards of 3 grams may be beneficial for some people in very like heavily resistance train, but for the most part, that 1.4 to 2 grams is supportive enough for athletes. And I mean, the general population who aren't training, it's closer to 0.8 grams. And then we'll just mention casein protein. So it's a type of protein found in some milk and dairy products, kind of like cottage cheese or yogurt. And this is a bit of a slower absorption protein. So there is some support for having this kind of like a near the end of the day or before bed, just to support that muscle recovery and growth, because it is that really slow absorption for just helping provide your body with some of that protein for that recovery. And I will just note, yes, there's lots of supplements out there that are casein protein, but I think, when we can get it from a food source, I always would recommend that first. And then fat requirements, again, fairly general, just so 0.5 to 2 grams this time per kilogram per day, avoiding, again, around those really strenuous training sessions. And then just wanted to bring it up because it gets asked a lot. Evidence for high fat ketogenic diets. So yes, there's lots of ongoing research in this area, but for now, there's no conclusive evidence to support that for that efficacy in athletic performance. And then there is some research to show that it may even decrease performance. So again, there's going to be lots of different sort of research and different findings on that, but generally that's where the consensus is as of right now, that those carbohydrate stores are just so important, especially for like sprinting and really quick dynamic sports. Okay, so getting into the good stuff with nutrient timing. So yeah, if we're thinking about, and again, I showed this slide last week, but before we talk about this, I just want us to recall, again, thinking about that blood sugar graph. So again, the carbohydrates kind of having the biggest impact on our blood sugars, and then that protein and fat kind of being that slower absorbed, slower rise in our blood sugars. And then if we're thinking about kind of that meal before our training or competition, that's why having a balanced meal is so important, because then we're getting some nice sustained energy. We're not getting any highs and crashes in our blood sugars, and it just really supportive. This is also why, as we get closer, we start to kind of have more just carbs and protein. And then as we get really close, just some carbohydrates. And what those do is they're basically like kind of topping up our glycogen stores and just topping up our body a bit. So 30 minutes before, say, an event, and again, not necessary for all sports. We're talking kind of really sort of higher intensity. But so if you had, say, half a banana, it's not even much that you're having before. So like half a banana, increasing those blood sugars. And that way, when we start that our game or training or whatever it is, we've got some blood sugars we can pull on right away, and it's just going to be supportive for lasting us a little bit longer and not depleting those glycogen stores as quickly. Okay, so actually, we already talked about that, but just again, thinking about, okay, what intensity is my sport at? Because where am I pulling that fuel from? So like I said, when I was golfing, our VO2 max by no means was up in the 85%. We'd be much lower. So I wouldn't need to kind of have a carbohydrate top up store. Like, I'm not depleting my glycogen, even though we're on the course for a long time. And I would have that certainly during the round, but obviously fat here would have been the main kind of fuel source pulling from. And of course, still important to have that balance. But when I was golfing, it'd be much more important to have those balanced meals and balanced snacks. Where some really high intensity sports, that's where that little bit of just straight carbohydrates can be beneficial. So thinking about how long will those carbohydrate stores last for? Like, how long that glycogen that's stored in our muscles that we pull from, how long will that last? So really high intensity is approximately, and again, everyone's a bit different, but approximately 30 minutes. And for high intensity, about 60. And then that moderate intensity, about 2 hours. So that can kind of give you a sense. So, think about your sport. Is it, a 90-minute soccer game? Is it a long run? Is it a marathon? Whatever it might be, that can sort of help you gauge, okay, when might I need to start topping up with some carbohydrates? and what might I need to support me through this. And then of course always still paying attention to, how was I feeling during that game? Did I start to crash around the 60-minute mark? Maybe I do just need something halfway through, some watered down sport energy drink or a little bit of fruit or something, or some dates or something like that, just to help give a little bit of energy. Because once those glycogen carbohydrate stores run out, our body it'll shift, it'll try and find fuel from other places. So whether that's breaking down protein and also start to burn more fat, which is a slower fuel and it doesn't sustain those high intensities. Okay, so these are just some, again, examples of, what's that duration of exercise and then how much carbohydrates is needed. So again, if it's under kind of that 60 minutes, usually, again, depending on the intensity, probably don't need any carbohydrates during that training or that exercise. But as it increases, kind of thinking around, that 30 to 60 grams per hour. I don't need to get confused with or bogged down by the single or multiple transportable carbohydrates for the most part. So that's just referring to, glucose would be a single because it's just one sugar molecule, but most carbohydrates are going to have a little bit of fructose and glucose in them anyways. So, and I'll talk about that a little bit in the next slide. But for the most part, just kind of paying attention to, okay, so if it's a longer than an hour, pretty high intensity, 30 grams per hour. If it starts to get even longer, might need a little bit more carbohydrates per hour. And then if it's that really ultra endurance, it can even get quite high to 90 grams. A general guideline from the American College of Sports Medicine for endurance exercise is that if it's over an hour, 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour, or that 0.7 grams per kilogram per hour is supportive of that. So yeah, just some examples. So again, the multiple transporter, the glucose and fructose, like a banana, dates, all of these things have both in there. So all would be beneficial. Homemade sports drinks are fantastic. I always like to say, watering down some Gatorade because often you don't need all of it. But again, and check. So 500 mils equals to 30 grams for some, but some might be a bit different. So always checking that label. But these are just some examples. So they're easy to digest, they're low in fat, and then low in protein. And then, afterwards, again, optimizing that recovery. And I think it's so important to emphasize, and we chatted about this last week, but, especially if your next training is within 8 hours. So thinking of if you're in a tournament or something like that, where you've got another game right away, really important to consume those carbohydrates and protein within 30 minutes. If your training is a little bit later than that, okay, as long as it's within the next sort of 60 minutes, but still it's, there's a lot of research to support it being beneficial within that 30 minutes. So trying to have that carbohydrates and some protein right away, and then making sure you have that balanced meal within kind of the next 2 to 3 hours. So I just put that guideline here again is just an example of how much carbohydrate and protein and fluids to have. And yeah, and I think we'll be sending the slides out afterwards, so you'll have that on there. So always really important, I think, to just go back to, we're eating to fuel, and food, like, yes, we're eating to fuel, and it's just so important to make sure that the composition of our food is really supportive of us as an athlete, and also just our health and well-being in general. So choosing those whole foods that have those vitamins and minerals, and that's, I see there's been a few questions about that with the iron and calcium. And so, when we choose kind of these whole foods, they're going to be a lot more rich in that. And these micronutrients are so important for helping with our energy production, really important for our repair. Particularly saw this when I was working with some of the varsity athletes at UBC, and there's a lot of challenges with, food on campus or not having kitchens, and, first time being away from home and having kind of plummeting fruit and vegetable intakes, and just how much this impacted their repair. So even though there was enough, protein in the diet, just not quite having the recovery, or not getting the recovery that they needed, because there just weren't those smaller micronutrients to help support that. So, these two kind of meal examples here, technically are very similar in macronutrients. They both got kind of carbohydrates. We got some from the French fries here, some protein from the chicken. There's going to be some fat in there. Versus same, there's protein from the salmon over here, some carbs from the brown rice, and then and a little bit of fat in the salmon and on the meal, but a huge difference in that micronutrient composition. There's a time and place for everything in different meals, and sometimes it's just what's available, but just recognizing that some can be quite more supportive. Okay, so I've just got a quick little YouTube here. So I'm just going to share that quickly and just watch a little video. Give me a break so we don't have to hear me talk for a minute. Okay, let's see if this works. So this is just a little YouTube clip. So Novak Djokovic, and so he really does credit some of his diet changes for his success. So I'll just play this here.
You know, I've experienced prior to 2010 Australian Open many struggles on the court, respiratory problems, inability to cope with the heat, endurance issues. Even though I was training hard, I was feeling that I'm losing that kind of fuel in my tank. I was feeling weaker, and then all of a sudden the vision became different. I didn't see the court as wide as it was at the beginning of the match, and I had blurred vision. I couldn't catch breath after each point was finished, and in no time he was a winner of the match. And I remember that between fourth and fifth set, I went out to throw up, and felt my stomach was aching. I felt my energy was so low, and my nose was blocked, and there was plenty of things going on. And that was not the first time. I didn't understand that there is this nutrition part that was blocking me in a way, because I wasn't eating correctly, even though I thought that I was.
Soccer leads by 4-1.
Coming from the culture where we're based a lot on.
Okay. Let's just switch back here. So yeah, I don't want to go into the details of what sort of Novak Djokovic did, just because again, everyone's different what works for them. But it's just, and interesting to highlight, here again, an elite athlete and thinking that he's kind of doing a lot of right things, but luckily through paying attention and being really aware, like, well, why am I fading a little bit? Why are some of these things happening? And then recognizing that there were more changes he could do, and really took sort of his health and nutrition into his hands to figure out what he could do and make some tweaks, and really did start to notice those energy improvements. Okay, so let's talk just a little bit again about the micronutrients, because I know come up a few times as a question, and just such an important area. So again, we did touch on this last week, and really want to emphasize again. So I put just like the recommendations in here, but of course the question is, well, how do we kind of get enough? And I think there was one earlier just about calcium and iron in particular. So I think it's important to know that actually these two particular things don't absorb well together. So if we're trying to improve our calcium and we're trying to improve our iron, we would want those, either if there is a supplement, to be taking it separately, or even some of those iron-rich and calcium-rich foods to try and take them a bit separately. For helping to increase iron absorption, certainly taking that with vitamin C can really help. So adding some slices of orange, if we're having some meat products or a plant-based iron source, that vitamin C will really help with that absorption. And there are two different types of iron. So that heme iron, which is found in animal products, and then the non-heme in the plant-based. So for some people, heme is better absorbed. So if somebody does have really struggles with keeping their iron up, seeing if there is any just animal-based proteins in their diet to support that, and then having those with some vitamin C. And honestly, sometimes if our iron's really low, just really struggling to get it up, then a supplement may be required. But of course, talking to somebody, first about that, just to make sure that it is appropriate. And that's usually after you've kind of done an iron test and seen where it's at. But those are just sort of some tricks. So again, yeah, having some sources like those eggs, or if it's a lean meat, adding some bell peppers, adding some slices of orange, and maybe separating out if we drink milk or some sort of calcium beverage, just having that a little bit apart from it, just so that those two sort of aren't canceling each other out, or impairing the absorption. And then, trying to find different calcium sources. So yeah, milk and yogurt and cheese, but more than just dairy products, there's lots of great fortified plant-based alternative beverages with calcium in them, a lot of fortified grain products, lots of vegetables will have calcium in them. And it can even sometimes be helpful. And I'm not a huge recommender of, tracking what we eat, but sometimes when we want to see if we're getting enough of something like calcium, it can be helpful just to plug it in. There's an online calcium calculator. I'll try and find the link and plug it into the chat, but that can be helpful for people who aren't sure, well, how much calcium am I getting? Am I meeting my needs? And plugging that in there to see whereabouts you fall and whether a supplement might be needed. And then of course, vitamin D, really important as well. So challenging these days, especially in northern latitudes and wintertime, because we do rely on the sun for a lot of our vitamin D, but there is some in eggs, some fish products, and then lots of fortified products. So a lot of beverages, if you kind of look at the labels, they'll say if they are fortified with vitamin D. So kind of paying attention to that can also be another source. And please feel free, if you'd like more elaboration on any of these, in the chat to plug that in. And then I just wanted to touch on inflammation for athletes. When we're high training, there's a lot of exercise-induced muscle damage, which can lead to inflammation. And acute inflammation, it's normal. It's our body's response to different damage that's kind of going on. And can heal, but it's we want to make sure we're not having chronic inflammation, and that we're also supporting when there is inflammation. And certainly poor nutrition can contribute. And this goes beyond just sort of sport nutrition. If we have a very high sugar diet, or kind of those high simple carbohydrates, where I showed that graph of that really quick spike. So frequent spikes of those blood sugars and then subsequent frequent spikes of insulin can be very inflammatory. So just recognizing that diet can impact that as well. So what do we do in terms of helping with that? Well, there's lots of foods that are quite anti-inflammatory, their properties. So again, our leafy green vegetables, really rich color vegetables and fruits, our bright berries, dark green kale, those sorts of things, bright bell peppers, squash and sweet potatoes. Omega-3s are very anti-inflammatory, so those would be found in salmon, but also sort of flax and seeds and walnuts, and lots of great spices as well that can be easily thrown into meals with ginger and garlic and turmeric. And then this is where, again, hydration is so important for helping with that recovery when we do have some inflammation, and adequate sleep. So if our sleep isn't very good, that can further kind of contribute to that inflammation. So just sort of some tips there for how to help with that. Yeah, okay, we'll get to those questions. So that's great. But just want to touch on, so how do we improve our own nutrition? And I just think it's so important paying attention to what works for you. And as I kind of showed in that clip with Novak Djokovic, he was doing obviously ongoing tracking and paying attention. Okay, well, where am I faltering, or how am I feeling? So starting to get in tune with some of those things, and it can be helpful for recording some of these in a journal. So, and again, I just like to make sure I'm differentiating. So not to say that we're tracking caloric intake, not encouraging necessarily that, but more so, okay, well, I had half a banana today with some peanut butter and oats. how was my performance? Okay, and I had that 3 hours before. How was my performance? What if I tried 2 hours? And does that allow me to maintain my energy throughout my game or my training? And so kind of paying attention to those things. And then by doing this, you can start to practice your game day nutrition. And I think this is so important. I don't think, if we're getting ready for a competition, we wouldn't, I'm going to use a golf example, but, 2 days before a golf tournament, I'm not going to go change my golf swing or change my golf grip. I'm sticking to what I've been practicing and what I know. And the nutrition should be no different. If we find that we work best on a little bowl of oatmeal about 2.5 hours before, and that's, just paying attention. Okay, so what is best for me, and how do I perform at my best? And okay, once I've kind of solidified, all right, this is that nutrition that I really like, and this is what I'm going to have afterwards to help with my recovery. Write that down, have it as part of kind of that competition prep, and have it ready to go, so that you refer to it and know, okay, yeah, I've got this taken care of. This is what I'm going to have before. So I'm just going to show one more clip of Usain Bolt, and I don't take his message the wrong way, but more so wanted to share it in the sense of, he really was paying attention to what he knew and knew what worked for him. So, okay.
All right, what's up?
Oh, I'll let it. Oh, it's gonna make it.
This is the canoe that a young couple will get gloriously lost in together.
All right, what's up, everybody? I'm Taylor Soper with Geek Wire. We're here at CES in Los
I'm just gonna check what time to start that at. So one moment, 1:15.
Speaking of your best self, you ate 100 chicken nuggets a day at the Beijing Olympics.
My best self. For me, that helped me a lot through my career.
Speaking of your best self, you ate 100 chicken nuggets a day at the Beijing Olympics. I think 1,000 chicken nuggets, and then you won a couple gold medals. So is that the key to success? The chicken nuggets?
I want to say yes, but for me, it was a safe bet.
A safe bet?
Yeah, when I went to China, the first thing they told us when we went to Beijing, do not eat outside the village. That's the first thing they told us. We were like, what? So we went into the hall, and I'm like, yo, I don't know these foods. I don't want to try anything new and then have problems. So I just stick to what I knew, chicken nuggets. So I worked with that for the whole entire time I was there.
Secret to success, chicken nuggets, I think.
So again, not necessarily saying that the secret to success is chicken McNuggets, but he recognized, okay, I need to stick to something that I've had before, that I'm aware of, and not go start trying different foods when I've got, such an important race coming up. Okay, so I'll do just a few key takeaways, and then we can go through some questions. So yeah, just to, taking all the information, lots of different eating patterns out there, but again, considering what is best for you and sticking with some of those kind of fundamental key components, with the carbohydrates and protein around our training, focusing on that recovery, and just really thinking about, okay, what's my sport? What are my needs for my sport? And how long, what is the duration? Because those are all going to sort of impact that nutrition. And then just really remembering, honestly, the best meal pattern, it's the one that, yes, it optimizes your sport performance, but it's also sustainable and it doesn't increase stress. So nutrition shouldn't be this really, stressful thing that people are trying to really cut and change and things like that. It needs to be supportive, and it's fueling, and it's helping lead you to your optimal performance and your potential. So yeah, nutrition is just another piece of that puzzle. Helps you really with those daily 1% improvements, finding ways that it can be tweaked and always supporting your energy. And then just starting to pay attention to how you're feeling, when you're eating certain foods, and becoming in tune with that. And having those kind of regular, consistent eating times throughout the day, having that protein consistent throughout the day, and choosing those nutrient-dense food choices when able, and then just remembering that it needs to be supportive of overall health as well, not just kind of that sport performance. So some key takeaways for you there, and then I'd be happy to get into some of these questions. Okay, so I'm just going to pull them up here. All right, so First, there was one, yeah, and this is so I'm going to read this one. So practice is ending at 8:30 p.m. and a snack within 30 minutes is doable, but a balanced meal within 2 to 3 would be odd timing. Absolutely. So, and this is just I think where we just have to kind of accept where that training and those times fall. And sure, the ideal recommendations are recommending that meal, but when that's putting us at like 11 p.m. or midnight, that's impairing other things like sleep. So I think just if we can get those carbohydrate carbs and protein within kind of that 30 minutes, if there's an option to just get in some of those other like micronutrients and vegetables and those sorts of food, even if it was closer to that window. I think when we have those late night practices and games, just any nutrition to be able to have a little bit afterwards is going to be supportive, and that'll still really help. And then it just means that breakfast the next day can try and have a really good balanced breakfast. But yeah, and so I'd encourage nutrition afterwards, but also recognize that sometimes it doesn't make sense to have like a full meal then 2 to 3 hours later. Hopefully that answers that one. But yeah, again, happy to elaborate more on that if you like. And then regarding, the iron and the calcium. Yeah, so if there's testing and it's kind of chronically low, the recommendation for an iron supplement absolutely is usually what's necessary. And then just continuing to check those iron levels sort of every 3 months after taking that consistent supplement. And then if the person is taking like a calcium supplement as well, just make sure that they're taken apart from each other. I've certainly seen where if some people just have a lot of issues with absorption, or if there is just something kind of genetic going on, that it can mean to be taking high levels of iron to get that up. Okay, I just want to make sure I didn't miss any questions earlier on.
No, I think you're pretty good there. I was going to ask Ali
Mm-hmm.
regarding the measurements and the quantities required that you've outlined, just the kind of basic outlines of what you might need to go for an hour or a 90-minute intensity. Do you recommend a way of tracking this, or is there an app out there, or a simple way of having a good grasp on that?
Yeah, it's such a great question, Kevin. So I find it's interesting. So sport nutrition loves to get very particular with numbers. So yes, I'll kind of answer this in two parts. There are absolutely some apps, or even just looking to see like with some of these guidelines of bananas 30 grams, or plugging an item quickly into like a MyFitnessPal or a Chronometer or something like that, if we're just curious to know how much carbohydrates it's providing. And then also going back to trying to find that slide. Just going back to, okay, how did I feel with that? So if I had half a banana and I just, didn't really feel like enough, then maybe we just need that whole banana. So first and foremost, paying attention to these are guidelines, and how am I feeling at an individual level? And then if we do want to just sort of, check a label to see how many grams of carbohydrates are there, or if we do, kind of want, an app to gauge how much are in some of those meals, then could plug them in there. And there are quite a few now. I've really gotten away from like the tracking apps. So if people are interested in a few options, I can certainly provide those afterwards. But does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, and I guess if you did get into the weeds, you would find out after a week or two, if you're doing it enough, like what you're kind of burning, and you get a good grasp on, you think of a banana's 30 grams, and you get a good grasp on what's what with you in your daily routine.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I think tracking can be so valuable, when it's tracking in just terms of becoming more in tune with how you're feeling, and noting things like recovery and digestion, like how's my stomach feel with that, and how do I feel when I do have this during my sport, or if I go the whole sport. And just an example, I remember playing around with this when I was doing early morning triathlons, and again, having these kind of recommendations, but just finding that okay, well, I'm going to try this one day, a few days and see how that goes. And then if you just, notice, okay, well, for me, I just found if it was too much food, which probably would have been in line with some recommendations, it really actually I found just hindered my performance. But by making it a little lighter, a little like less protein, just a little bit of carbohydrates, found that helpful. But that's where it can come from, just that kind of tracking and paying attention to some of your own, how you're responding.
Yeah, and I know we've mentioned logging as well, logging what you've eaten. Would you say is important as well? Maybe this ties into the mental aspect as well of how you feel. That's a pretty good gauge, right, on kind of what you're putting in your body.
Well, and I think it's the best gauge. And the reason being, a lot of these tracking apps where we're tracking food, and if we're tracking the food to note like how many calories and everything, there's such a variation. Like there's a huge range in a lot of those apps. Like they're not going to be completely accurate with the foods that are being plugged in. It's not taking into account things like thermogenic effect of food, where protein kind of takes more calories to absorb and break down, and just little things like that. So I think if we want to use it as a rough guide, that can be helpful. But again, at the end of the day, the best kind of tracking, in my opinion, are things like energy, like GI or gastrointestinal, how our kind of stomach and things are feeling, performance throughout. Looking at kind of those factors. And then also sometimes old-fashioned tracking with like pen and paper, because then we can see, okay, I'm not getting, super uptight with the calories that were provided this day, but I am getting a really good snapshot. Okay, what did I eat and what was I eating around my nutrition?
For sure.
Or my sport, sorry.
Yeah, I think it's a great habit to get into. And you can start it now. What a great time to start it, when get off your computer, take a break, and then jot some ideas down or feelings down about how you're feeling. If you had that game and or you had that run and it felt great, then you might reflect on how you've ate that day, and that will take that into your training and your habits. I think it's a great time and a great message there.
Yeah, I agree. And that's where, tracking can, I just think, be so valuable, where it just helps us become more in tune with our performance in our sport. So it can be a really kind of beneficial thing to do. All right, so I see another question there. So really, really intense need to sleep post-competition. So I am curious if that is also the person who's a bit iron deficient, because of course iron levels will definitely impact sleep and and energy. So that would certainly be that's almost usually one of the first things I go to if somebody's just really, really fatigued and really needs a lot of sleep afterwards, would be, okay, how are their iron levels? I'd probably just look at like their B12 levels as well. In terms of nutrition to support, I would definitely encourage that balancing of thinking of that blood sugar graph, and having balanced meals. So if we're having some carbohydrates, pairing it with some of that protein or fat, just to help prevent highs and lows, which can further contribute to some crashing and some fatigue.
Okay, I'm going to do our draw now. So for those who just got off the call, I feel really bad.
Oh no.
Guys, I got to shut it down first. So Ali, if you can please give me a number between 1 and 12, that would be great.
Okay, I'm gonna go 3.
Bleach. Have I said that right? Or is that your first name, last name? I'm not sure. Bleach, you have won a $50 gift card. Congratulations. That's Brian Leash. Nicely done. And can you give me another number, please?
Sure. Going odd numbers tonight. Let's go 11.
Okay. Victoria Ross. Victoria Ross, are you there? You have won a $50 gift card.
All right.
Okay. I'll write them down because I will forget. Gloria, and bleach. Okay, cool. Any more questions in there? No, just a lot of celebrating. That's good. Alison, that was tremendous. Again, tons of great information, and just very practical that we can all use. Even though it was targeted to those high performing athletes, but even if you're not high performing, I know a lot of kids these days, they're doing so much, they need fueling. So
Yeah, absolutely.
we'll probably wrap it up there. Any last words from you, Alison?
No, just thanks again, everybody. And if any, questions do come up, and I'm always happy to answer any email questions. Oh, I didn't put my email there, but it is what is my email these days? Alison.kaizenmind.ca. Maybe I'll include that, Kevin, when I send you the presentation to be sent out to everyone.
Sure, please do.
Does that work? And then, yeah, I'm always happy to answer any follow-up questions by email.
Next week, we are targeting coaches. So I know some of you on the call are coaches, and you've done the whole series, which is great. But I want you kids out there to go and bug your coaches and say, hey, get some information from Alison next week, because the more people who have this, especially coaches, the better, because then we can create better athletes and just help them with their development. So next week is targeting coaches of all different levels, grassroots to high performance. I'm really looking forward to it. If you've got any feedback, please shoot me an email, klindo@pacificsport.com. It's on the website as well. Got any feedback of the presentation, anything you'd like to see or maybe not see as much of, let us know. And if there's anything that you want to see in terms of a different topic altogether, please let us know. We're all about putting education in the community. And that is it from me. Hope you have a good evening and the good rest of your week. Goodbye, everybody, and I will send out the link.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.